Picture this. You're standing in the grand courtyard of an ancient empire, shackled and trembling as the monarch's guards drag forward a strange contraption unlike anything you've ever seen. At first glance, it looks almost ceremonial, a symbol of power rather than punishment. You might hope it's some kind of ritual, perhaps even a swift death. But what follows is not a quick end. It's a spectacle of cruelty so calculated, so inventive, that even the most barbaric torture devices of the Middle Ages pale in comparison. What awaits you is not mere execution, it is performance. It is theater. And above all, it is a message to everyone watching. Across the world and throughout history, rulers developed punishments that were as much about psychological domination as they were about ending a life. These methods were designed not only to destroy bodies, but to crush spirits, to etch terror into the minds of subjects and enemies alike. Imagine being forced to endure days, even weeks of suffering, not hidden away in dungeons, but displayed in public squares where the cries of agony became warnings louder than any proclamation. And here's the chilling part. These executions weren't considered shameful. To the monarchs who ordered them, they were works of art, expressions of power that blurred the line between justice, spectacle, and sadism. You'll soon see that these rulers were not satisfied with simple hangings or clean beheadings. No, that was far too merciful. Their imaginations reached into darker places, producing punishments so elaborate and disturbing that historians still struggle to describe them without shuddering. Welcome to the shadowed world of ancient monarchs, where thrones were built not only on armies and gold, but on blood, fear, and creativity in cruelty. What you are about to uncover takes us far beyond the battlefield and into the twisted minds of rulers who saw execution as theater, as a weapon, and as a lasting legacy. Before we plunge into these forgotten horrors, take a moment to subscribe for more journeys into the darkest corners of human history. Drop a comment to let me know where in the world you're watching from. It's remarkable that across centuries and continents, we can gather here, connected by our curiosity about the past. Now, you might wonder, why didn't these monarchs settle for swift justice? The answer lies in the very nature of unchecked power. For them, execution was never just about death. It was about control, fear, and leaving scars that would last for generations. The architect of fear, Ivan the Terrible's Oprychnimabot, Ivan IV of Russia, better known as Ivan the Terrible, didn't just execute people, he engineered an entire system of fear around death itself. Where other rulers sought efficiency, Ivan demanded spectacle. His private army, the Oprichniki, became specialists in creative brutality, trained not merely as soldiers, but as executioners, inquisitors, and actors in his ongoing theater of terror. These men, dressed in black robes and mounted on horses adorned with dog heads and brooms, symbolized Ivan's mission to sniff out treason and sweep it from the land. But their punishments were anything but symbolic. Victims were dragged through the streets in grotesque processions, before being subjected to tortures so meticulously staged that they blurred the line between justice and performance. Of Ivan's favored methods involved boiling people alive. Cauldrons were prepared in city squares, heated slowly so that the condemned would feel their flesh blistering long before death. Yet Ivan rarely allowed the boiling to proceed uninterrupted. Victims would be pulled out, half scalded, doused in cold water, and then returned to the pot, stretching agony into hours. Other times, Ivan ordered executions in layers of cruelty. A noble suspected of betrayal might first watch his family dismembered, their limbs severed with deliberate precision. The condemned would then be made to march past the mutilated bodies before facing his own fate. By combining physical torture with psychological devastation, Ivan ensured his punishments reached far beyond the individual to poison entire bloodlines with trauma. And then there was the infamous Novgorod massacre. Convinced that the city's merchants were conspiring against him, Ivan orchestrated one of the largest public displays of cruelty in medieval Europe. Thousands were rounded up, bound, and marched to the riverbanks. Instead of swift executions, Ivan ordered prolonged drownings. Victims were tied in groups, weighed with stones, and slowly lowered beneath the ice-covered Volkhov River. Soldiers stood ready to hack apart the ice when bodies threatened to resurface, forcing families to watch as their loved ones were dragged beneath the freezing waters. Again and again, Ivan understood the power of collective terror. The deaths themselves were almost secondary. What mattered was the psychological footprint they left. Merchants who survived never again questioned Moscow's authority. Neighboring towns heard whispers of rivers clogged with corpses and submitted without a fight. Ivan had discovered that a single execution was justice, but thousands, staged as theater, became legend. His oprichniki even developed a manual of cruelty, experimenting with new methods to prolong suffering while keeping victims alive. Horses were trained to tear prisoners apart, limb by limb. Wooden wheels were used to break bones systematically, turning bodies into grotesque displays left to rot on city walls. In each case, Ivan ensured executions were public lessons, designed to erode any notion of resistance. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Ivan's reign was his personal involvement. Unlike rulers who delegated, Ivan often attended executions, sometimes wielding the executioner's axe himself. Court chroniclers describe him laughing as nobles begged for mercy, or pausing mid-execution to invent a new variation of torture. For Ivan, cruelty wasn't just policy, it was passion. His reign left Russia permanently scarred. Generations grew up believing rebellion was not only futile but unthinkable. Ivan had transformed execution into a philosophy of power, proving that fear could govern more effectively than armies. Yet Russia was not alone in such spectacles. Moving west, we encounter France under a monarch whose cruelty combined legal authority with a flair for public humiliation. Louis XI, the Spider King, the Spider King's web. France, under Louis Xi of France, known by his contemporaries as the Spider King, earned his title not only for his political cunning, but for the webs of terror he spun through creative execution. Unlike Ivan's raw brutality, Louis favored psychological torture wrapped in ceremony, crafting punishments designed to strip away dignity as much as life. His most notorious creation was the iron cages, tiny cells made of metal bars, barely large enough for a human body. Prisoners were locked inside, forced into unnatural positions where they could neither stand nor lie down. Days turned into weeks as their muscles atrophied and their sanity fractured. These cages were sometimes suspended in public squares, transforming suffering into spectacle. Citizens passed by daily, reminded that disobedience to the crown meant a slow, humiliating decline into madness. But Louis didn't stop at confinement. He delighted in turning executions into carnivals. Criminals were paraded through Paris in elaborate processions before facing punishment, often forced to wear costumes mocking their alleged crimes. One infamous traitor was dressed as a pig and beaten through the streets before being roasted alive in a parody of a feast. For Louis, the degradation before death was just as important as the execution itself. His creativity extended to punishments tailored to individual crimes. A man accused of spreading rumors might have his tongue pierced with hot irons before being strangled. A thief might be forced to swallow molten lead, ensuring that the punishment mirrored the crime in grotesque symbolism. This personalization made every execution a form of theater, one where the script was written by the king. Himself, perhaps most chilling, was Louis's manipulation of religion. He often staged executions outside churches, forcing clergy to bless the instruments of torture. Victims were sometimes dressed in mock vestments, turning their deaths into blasphemous parodies of holy ritual. By fusing faith with brutality, Louis ensured that resistance seemed not only politically dangerous, but spiritually damning. The Spider King also pioneered propaganda executions. Instead of hiding cruelty, he ensured it was meticulously recorded in chronicles, engravings, and rumors spread by royal messengers. His goal was simple: to make defiance unthinkable by ensuring that every citizen knew the fate of those who dared. Psychologically, this approach was devastating. People feared not only death, but the humiliation that preceded it. To die under Louis was to be transformed into a grotesque story retold for generations, a cautionary tale woven into the fabric of French society. Louis's genius lay in understanding that memory lasts longer than pain. The sight of an iron cage hanging in the square haunted citizens far longer than the screams of the condemned. By weaponizing humiliation, he created a culture where obedience became instinctive. But Louis was not the only ruler to wield execution as theater. To the south, the Mughal emperors of India perfected their own blend of cruelty and spectacle, turning death into both entertainment and political message. Thrones of Blood, the Mughal Empire's theater of death in Mughal India. Execution was more than punishment, it was a royal performance. staged with the precision of a court ceremony. Emperors such as Aurangzeb and Jahangir understood that the true strength of a ruler lay not only in wealth or armies, but in the ability to command fear through spectacle. Of the most infamous Mughal practices was elephant execution. Condemned criminals were brought into public arenas, where trained elephants crushed them underfoot, but the cruelty lay in the control. These elephants were trained not to kill instantly. Instead, they pressed their massive feet slowly onto victims, breaking bones methodically while keeping them alive. Sometimes sharp blades were attached to the elephant's tusks, turning executions into grotesque dissections. The emperor often presided personally, deciding whether to order a swift death or prolong the agony for hours. For the Mughal rulers, these executions were not private punishments, they were grand spectacles. Nobles, merchants, and commoners were summoned to watch. Execution arenas became theaters of obedience, where the emperor's absolute control over life and death was displayed in the most visceral way possible. Yet Mughal creativity extended far beyond elephants. One favored method involved slow dismemberment, where executioners removed body parts one at a time, often beginning with fingers and ears before progressing to limbs. Victims were kept alive with crude medical techniques, ensuring the process could last an entire day. Another method was roasting alive in metal cylinders, heated gradually so the condemned could feel flesh cooking from within before merciful unconsciousness arrived. The psychological element was key. By staging executions in marketplaces, emperors ensured that the memory of screams and the sight of mangled bodies became part of daily life. Markets smelled not only of spices, but of scorched flesh, embedding fear deep into the rhythms of society. Aurangzeb, in particular, weaponized execution as political theater. Rebels were not merely killed, they were displayed. Heads were mounted on city gates, while bodies were arranged along highways as warnings to travelers. Even after death, the condemned served the empire by silently broadcasting the futility of resistance. But perhaps the most chilling Mughal method was family punishment. When nobles were accused of treason, their entire households suffered. Sons were executed before fathers, wives tortured before husbands, ensuring that every condemned man endured not only his own pain but the psychological torment of watching loved ones destroyed. Foreign travelers described these spectacles with horror, noting how ordinary citizens attended them with the same enthusiasm as festivals. For the Mughals, cruelty was not a secret. Shemit was statecraft, a public art, ritual that bound society together through shared fear. What unites Ivan, Louis, and the Mughals is not just their brutality, but their understanding of power as performance. Execution was not an end in itself, but a script, carefully staged to maximize fear, obedience, and memory. And the question that lingers just as with Vlad, Zetian, or Tokugawa's this, were these rulers inherently sadistic, or did absolute power transform them into monsters? History suggests the answer is both. But what's undeniable is that their legacy of terror reshaped entire civilizations, leaving scars still visible in cultural memory centuries later, from Persia's death by Scaphism to Japan's slow-hanging torments, from Zetian's grotesque human swine to the Inquisition's theater of fire. We've descended through the most twisted corridors of royal imagination, where cruelty was elevated into ritual. These weren't simply punishments. They were deliberate spectacles of terror, engineered to remind every subject that disobedience carried not just death, but humiliation and suffering without limit. Each monarch we've uncovered understood something chilling, that fear lingers longer than memory. By making executions both creative and unforgettable, they planted nightmares that no army could erase. These rulers turned justice into theater and transformed pain into policy, leaving behind societies that learned to kneel not only to swords, but to symbols of dread. The most disturbing truth isn't just the agony of the victims, but the silence of the millions who watched, who absorbed the message, and who came to accept brutality as the natural language of authority. In their silence, cruelty found permanence. But here is the unsettling question for us today. In an age of digital surveillance, mass control, and psychological manipulation, can we truly say the script has changed? The devices may look different, the arenas may be virtual instead of public squares, but the principle remains the same: power when fused with creativity. becomes a weapon sharper than steel able, to dominate not only bodies but entire generations of minds. So ask yourself this: if you lived beneath these monarchs, what would you have done? And perhaps more importantly, what hidden forms of cruelty are we living under now, quietly accepting without even noticing?